Imagine taking your dream job, everything you've ever worked for, and then all of a sudden everyone tells you that you're not good enough at that job. And even worse than that, the job becomes too much for you. Well, this is the harsh reality of football management. And we're going to answer the question of why that particular feeling arises so much in managers these days, to the point where they simply can't continue.
There's a lot of things that managers could do a little better in order to ease the pressure on them.
How often do we hear the word motivation used in football? All the time, right? But two words that we don't see alongside them are intrinsic and extrinsic.
If you have a sophisticated relationship with motivation, from intrinsic, from deep, to external, I want to win, I really want to win, I want to perform well, I want to win trophies, but also extracting the joy from the moment-to-moment interactions that you have with the game, that's a deeper underpinning of relentlessness.
And I think this is our first problem when it comes to burnout. Intrinsic motivation comes from within. It's being motivated enough to complete a task because it's internally rewarding. The latter, extrinsic motivation, comes externally. Your goal is focused on the outcome of the task, which may not satisfy your psychological needs, your intrinsic motivators. And this, of course, can become tiresome. The point being, extrinsic motivation derives from external gains like money, fame, power, winning. And being a football manager needs both. But why do these two types of motivation become overwhelming?
It's fatigue. Your attentional stores are depleted, and so subsequently you simply just can't pay attention.
There are constant challenges that come across, and you have to change and adapt, I think, as time goes along, particularly in line with your resources or your ambitions or whatever it might be.
Think of attention as a bottleneck scenario. All those factors are going into the wide end, whilst you as a manager then have to condense it down into an outcome. This leads to three things: build-up, congestion, and burnout. But why can't continued success be enjoyed? In 2023, 13 Premier League managers were sacked from their jobs, and by the start of March last season, there were already 37 departures in the 92 teams that make up the top 4 tiers of the Football League in England. Now, despite this being from last year, this table will still be haunting to almost every manager in professional football in England. And we can see from the table that sackings are almost more natural than breathing when it comes to football. Mourinho said it, you're only a football manager once you get the sack. And despite only a few sackings in the Premier League this year, people have longer memories than that. And psychologically, it has to be draining.
We are made up of hormones that can deplete. And so over time, I think the more that we experience this, the more that our inner narrative starts to become, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I don't think I can do this anymore.
So with all this considered, it begs the question of how a manager can truly have emotional warmth and empathy when they are constantly fearful for their survival, for their job.
Being vulnerable, I think, is important. I think it's an important tool. I think in the end, in any role that you do, if you're a leader, you are a role model. You have to role model the behaviours you want in people.
By the way, the snippets from this interview come from my podcast, The Ripple Effect. There's a link to that in the description. You can go and check out both full podcasts. Football and human life often line up, be that because of the social aspects or the morality in the game. Football often lifts a lid on general human life and can be an insight into how people change over time. Gone are the days of steely-eyed authoritarian managers, and we're now seeing a more vulnerable and emotionally intelligent breed of managers akin to the changing attitudes of people and, more specifically, the football players themselves. But there are still gaps in some managers in terms of voicing their emotions, and this inability to articulate their emotion, does it hold them back to the point where they can't continue?
We tend to have 5 main traits that spells out ocean: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Something that isn't focused on enough, in my opinion, is that when you hear ex-footballers or ex-managers speak about their success, their main point is always to not look at the success of the past and instead look ahead to where the next success is coming from. And this is where your success as a manager or player seriously comes under the microscope, because people change over time.
the situation we find ourselves in, we start to experience and set ourselves new objectives, new goals based on what we've experienced.
And this statement here could help us really shine a light on why managers can't be figureheads at football clubs anymore, and why the term burnout is now a word hanging over the head of every manager in the country, even if they don't know it yet. So the question then becomes, what truly is success, and is it quantifiable? And the reason I ask this question is because, well, the goalposts are always moving as expectations rise or diminish. And whilst we develop as people, we sometimes don't develop fast enough to counteract the constant amendments of the parameters. Being a dinosaur gets used as a put down towards managers all the time, and it's never felt more prevalent than it does right now. But is that fair? These managers have survived. They've not burnt out. Now look at the greatest managers of all time. You of course go to Pep Guardiola, Sir Alex Ferguson, Carlo Ancelotti's in there, he's got to be, hasn't he? Managers who either have or are still working wonders because of their ability to get ahead of the curve and to be chameleons almost, constantly changing and adapting their approach to win matches. Now of course we've left one manager out of this, a manager who has taken his club further than almost every single one of his predecessors, whilst also adapting to the changing tides of football, Jurgen Klopp. Which was the whole reason why we wanted to dive into this issue, because he's walking away. He as a manager, but just as importantly as a man, is a fantastic, perfect personification of why we are doing this video. Klopp has made changes. He's then made further changes to those changes whilst ensuring success along the way. And when you take a step back and look at the role of a manager, it's a lot deeper than you realised. First of all, you are coaching the team almost every single day, dealing with the individual players, often dealing with their personal problems, not just footballing matters. And of course, you've got the other side of that as well. They have to deal with you, so you have to get on with them. I know Klopp spoke recently about it's important to be nice to be a manager that can survive, because people have to deal with you every single day. You're preparing for 2 games a week, 3 games in 7 or 8 days, liaising with countless staff members, and that's not even the most important part, because without the success on the pitch, it all gets overlooked. Every second of that work. That role of a manager is broad and demanding in terms of the people around the manager. You have to manage horizontally around departments. And whilst all of this is going on, we expect our managers to be at the forefront of the development within the game and to have answers to things that may not happen for weeks to come, and to predict things and to get them right as well. So, motivation, attention, fear, vulnerability, emotional endurance, and keeping up. All the things that go unnoticed in the day-to-day life of a football manager. And that's without any of the tactical, media, or the coaching aspects of football. Things that can't be quantified. Things that can't dissipate over time. And some things you simply can't reclaim once they go away. The time span of a manager is often short-lived these days. You either lose your job because of results, or you simply lose yourself in the competitive and cutthroat nature of the role. And that's why manager burnout may be an unsolvable problem that will never go away. But is there a solution? Well, in fact, the solution has been staring us in the face this entire time, and it comes back to the abbreviation of OCEAN, which I've always found very calming anyway. Maybe just have a dip in the sea.
Openness to experience is in essence, your creativity and intelligence dimension. You know, your openness to look at things in different ways. Conscientiousness is also about orderliness, and that's the organization. You've got to be personally organized. A lot of people say, well, you don't need to be extroverted. You can be introverted. And I absolutely agree with that statement. However, the organization is big. I've got to lead across departments. You don't have much time to yourself. So being introverted, you can be a football leader, but introversion can get in the way of that. Klopp is clearly extroverted. Agreeableness, you have to have the ability to be disagreeable. We talk about it a lot in football now, to have that kind of culture of empathy and relationship. Ultimately, you still have to have conflict and confrontation and contestation. And then the final one, which is a horrible word, which is neuroticism, which is basically emotional stability. I'm sorry, but you do have to stay reasonably emotional stable through tough times, because as the leader of the organization, your attitude, your actions, your behavior heavily mediates the temperature, the emotional temperature of your team and your organization.
And of course, we're talking about football, we're talking about management, but when it comes to burnout, this is something that we can all think about, dive into ourselves, and have a look at openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. It feels like a manager has to know who they are if they want to succeed, and that comes from being open and honest with yourself, and that sometimes means that you've got to be critical of yourself, and sometimes you have to remove yourself from certain situations. And for most, it's going to be about knowing what your weaknesses are. Because if you know your weaknesses, then nobody can point them out to you as one of your shortfalls or blow them up into bigger weaknesses than they actually are. But to do all of this with every other single aspect of the game wrapped into it, I mean, it requires a lot. Some are going to succeed, some won't, but it's an insight into how tough it is to be a manager and the harsh reality behind it all. So maybe give them a break now and again. Could Ruben Amorim be the next manager of Liverpool? Quite possibly. How's he going to set up? Click here to find out.